Formed in 1929, the Japanese American Citizens League is the oldest and largest educational, civil, and human rights organization representing Americans of Japanese ancestry. Kamishibai, or paper drama, is a form of street theater and storytelling that dates back to pre-war Japan. The images held in this box tell the story of two Sonoma County children and their experience during the Second World War. The story of Yuki and Taro. Taro. The Yamada family had a chicken farm in Sebastopol. 8-year-old Yuki loved living in the country, and she liked taking her doll Mary to her special sitting spot in the oak tree. From there they could watch the chickens when they were out in the pen during the day. Her brother Taro, who was 4 years older, helped Papa with the daily chores. Spot followed him around as he fed the chickens. Yuki was worried because lately Mama and Papa seemed very serious. One night after dinner, they told the children that the United States was at war with Japan, where Mama and Papa had grown up. They said that the Japanese military had bombed American ships at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Because of that, the FBI had come and taken away their minister and the Saturday Japanese school teacher and some of the other important men in their community. No one knew where they were or when they would be coming back. At school, some of the children she thought were her friends had started whispering behind her back, and Frank called her a Jap enemy and told her to go back to her own country. What do you mean? America is my country. Yuki loved singing America the Beautiful, and her chest swelled with pride when her class said the Pledge of Allegiance every morning at school. Why would Frank say such mean things to her? One day, something bad happened. When Yuki was walking home from school, she saw big poster signs up everywhere, tacked on trees and telephone poles, taped on store windows, and even on the door of the Buddhist temple. People were gathered around reading the signs. She couldn't read all the big words and didn't know what they said. Papa and Mama were very upset. They said the signs said that all people of Japanese ancestry had to leave home. But why, Papa? What have we done? We haven't done anything wrong, he said. But people are angry with Japan, and our faces are Japanese. Papa said they were going to be taken away from their farms and homes, and they only had 10 days to get ready. What would happen to all the chickens and the apple trees? Papa said they could take only what they could carry, so he was busy trying to sell his tractor, their cow, their furniture, and their car. Mama was quietly crying as she started packing things in large duffel bags. She packed sheets, blankets, and towels, a plate, a bowl, a cup, and chopsticks for each of them. She put their kettle inside a pot and wrapped it in a dishcloth. She worried about what clothing she should pack. Would it be rainy or snowy? Would it be hot? The duffel bags were quickly filled, and still they needed to pack more. Taro brought Spot's dish for Mama to pack. She put her hand on his shoulder and shook her head. I'm sorry, Taro, but you can't take Spot. No one's allowed to take any animals. Taro couldn't believe it. Spot had been his companion since he was a puppy. How could he just leave him behind? The next day, Taro asked each of his friends if they could take care of Spot, but all of the Japanese children were trying to find new homes for their pets, and no one could take Spot. At school, Yuki shyly told her best friend Betty that she had to go away. Mama said I can't even take my doll Mary with me. You're my best friend. Maybe Mary wouldn't be so sad if she could stay with you. Will you keep her until I come home again? She carefully put Mary in Betty's arms. She knew that Mary would be loved, but still, she cried herself to sleep that night. On May 16, 1942, all of the Sonoma County people of Japanese descent reported to the train station in Santa Rosa. All day Taro stared out the window and thought about how he'd left all the food from their icebox on the front steps for Spot to eat. He worried about what Spot would do when the food was gone. He cried inside as he thought about how his faithful dog had whimpered and watched as they left the farm. After a long day in the train, the weary travelers were unloaded at a fairgrounds filled with rows of buildings called barracks. These would be their temporary homes. Since they were a family of just four, they had to share a 20-foot by 10-foot room with another family of three. But they were lucky. Some people had to live in dirty old horse stalls. Poor Mama was so ashamed to use the toilets, they were simply benches with holes cut in them. Worst of all, they were surrounded by barbed wire fences. They were prisoners. 6 months later, everyone was loaded into another train. It was very hot and crowded in that train. They had to leave the windows closed and the shades down unless they were traveling far away from towns. For 3 miserable days they traveled to some unknown place until finally the noisy train stopped and they were unloaded. Taro and Yuki were stunned. They were out in the middle of a huge desert, and there were row after row of barracks, enough to house 10,000 people. They were told they had been taken away for their own safety, that people might mistake them for the enemy. But the children saw that they were surrounded by barbed wire, and they saw tall guard towers. There were soldiers in the towers who were pointing their guns at the people inside. When they got to camp, they were given a small living space for all four of them. They each had a cot with a thin mattress and a scratchy wool blanket. There was a coal-burning stove for heat and one light bulb. There was no kitchen, no bathroom. They had to eat in the mess hall and use the same toilets as everyone else. Papa made their table and chairs from scrap wood, and Mama made curtains out of sheets to hang between the beds. Life was hard. It was scorching hot in the summer and so very cold in the winter. The desert sand blew into their eyes and their mouths and came through the cracks in the walls. Mama had to sweep their room every morning. They had to eat terrible food in the mess hall, and they had to stand in line. They stood in line for breakfast. They stood in line for lunch. They stood in line for dinner. They stood in line to use the bathroom. They stood in line to take a shower. They stood in line to wash their sheets and clothes by hand in the wash house. There was nowhere to be alone. Soon, classes were started. Yuki was enrolled in third grade, and Taro went into sixth grade. Yuki's class had one teacher and 48 students. The people made the best life they could out in the desert. They organized craft classes and baseball teams. Older teenagers formed a band and played popular music for dances. Some families even created beautiful little gardens outside the doors of their rooms. When Taro was 16 and Yuki was 12, after 4 long years, the Amachi prison camp was closed and the people were released. The Yamadas could go home to Sebastopol. It was wonderful to see the farm again. Yuki ran to find her special sitting branch in the old oak tree and breathed in the sweet September air of home. Taro quietly walked the land and called for Spot. When he didn't find him, he went to the neighboring farms and asked if anyone knew what happened to him. No one had any answers for Taro. He was so happy to be home, but very sad that Spot was gone. The next week, the children went back to school. Now Taro had to go to Anley High School. He was worried because he was unfamiliar with the corridors and the classrooms. To his surprise, some of his old friends met him at the school entrance and walked him to his class. But most of the kids kept their distance and just looked at him and whispered to each other. Yuki was anxious to find her old friend Betty, but she wasn't in class. Yuki's heart fell when she found out that Betty had moved away several years ago. She missed her best friend, and she longed to hold her doll again. A long time went by. One Saturday, a car came to the Yamada's house, and much to Yuki's surprise, out jumped Betty. Betty's family had heard that the Yamadas had returned home, and they drove a long way to visit them. Betty had something behind her back. It was Yuki's doll Mary. Now that Yuki knew her dear friend had waited for her and still cared for her, she truly felt like she was home. None of the Japanese American families in Sonoma County lost their homes because the kindness of neighbors who took care of their homes and farms while they were incarcerated. This was very unusual. For most people who lived in urban areas, they lost their homes, their businesses. Many farms were also lost. Life after incarceration was a terrible struggle for most people. There was much prejudice and discrimination. Many people returning from camp had difficulty finding homes and jobs. For these people, leaving the camps meant starting over. not resuming their old lives. This presentation was funded by a legacy grant provided by the National JACL and members of the Sonoma County JACL. If you would like more information on this presentation or the JACL Speakers Bureau, please email speaker@sonomacountyjacl.org or call 707-778-8895 or visit our website at www.sonomacojacl.org. Thank you.